Hello everybody, it's Marci from wavesofcommunication.com. Welcome to another episode of the Language Facilitation Helpline podcast, and thank you for tuning in today. The fastest results come when you enjoy the process of language facilitation.
My questions are mainly career-oriented. I kind of just want to know, how did you get into this field as a successful professional outside of these common channels that to me are so hostile?
Yeah, wow. So you're right. I had to cut ties. I literally had to leave. And I tried to have one foot in, one foot out. And it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the language modeling that you're using is more functional and not scripted, which would be the memorization sort of way to go about things. I want X. And you don't model those kinds of things for your client. You model real language, functional language. And so that's kind of the difference between those two things. And in the
I see.
system, there really isn't any evidence. There's some these older practitioners, people like Stanley Greenspan and the floor time model, they emphasize the connection and the exchange, the back and forths of communication, even nonverbal communication, before the language was even modeled, or simultaneous as the language is modeled. And that's sort of the natural language acquisition model. But then in order to sort of merge it over to this memorization ABA data collection environment, see, you know what you do. You can't collect data about it because it's an incredibly intuitive process. And that idea that you even had to get out of your head. So she's paying me hourly, and like the more words I can facilitate in an hour, the better I look. But that's not what this job is.
It's hard to transition because that's what my last job was.
Exactly. It's a big transition. And I can see you there going, but he doesn't want to work with me. What do I do? You facilitate that. And that's where the has changed. So this is what you have to realize is the anomaly of what I do versus what everybody else does, is the intuitive part. Your outcome, your goals, your progress is not based on how many words this kid is saying. It's not based on performance at all. It's based on their experience of learning, and you see the results over time in the child's functional independence in spoken language. Like this 16-year-old, you count the fact that he got up. In his case, you see that this is a situation that he is thinking something different than what I am. Like you said, you have to pay attention to the things you don't want to hear, right? And facilitate those things, right? So again, the ways that you're going to represent as that, right? As this intuitive person is start using that word. Because here's the thing, the way the universe is changing the planet right now, and the parents who are like your clients are realizing that if I've got a choice of what I see on care.com or wherever I'm finding my person, because I'm sending them out there looking for them all over the world. I'm like, Mama, if you don't have time and you need another person, you've got to hire somebody like Avi. And here are the characteristics. They're going to watch this interview and see these are the characteristics that I'm looking for. And they're also going to see when they get somebody who says, I'm certified behavior technician and I've had X amount of hours working in these schools, in these traditional schools that you like left, then that's the person you pass on those. And you pick up the ones that are like Avi. So you just continue to represent. How did I do it? I started a YouTube channel. I made 600 videos where I talked to parents about this experience and their responsibility to connect act and respond, not react, not judge, not label, not do those things. And see, once they as parents decide, oh my gosh, because it doesn't take long for a mom to make this shift from I'm doing it. But see, you still, even in the mom that you are working with, who has known me for 2 years,
Yes.
she still overbooks him. She still pressurizes him because in her heart, he's 9 years old and still not talking. And when she lays her head on the pillow, she's worried about his future and she's
Absolutely.
freaking out. And it's hard for her to see. It was before she met you, you see, Avi. But when she met you, she said, my kid is going to be like this woman who is in
Really?
school and studying
That's
and
so
going to
sweet.
college. But he's not going to be like this woman if he's still going to this school learning kitchen objects.
Yeah.
So something's
And
got to
that's the awful
happen.
part is
Something's got to happen to
it's
facilitate because the schools see they are not equipped for these kids. They're not equipped. So we have to equip the kids for the school. If you want to get them in into regular education, you have to get them listening. Yeah, at least to the point where they can mask it, right?
yeah.
Because like you
It's
said, your
hard because
friend,
those fears are so drilled into them by people who just want to turn them into workers. Is, oh, your
and
kid's
that's
not
why we
talking,
got to
something's
stop
wrong.
this early
Yeah.
intervention because they put these kids in these programs before they're 2 years old, and that starts programming their brain that what you're doing is wrong from
Yeah.
below 2 years old. They don't even know what they're doing right or wrong
Yeah,
at that
it's very
age.
awful. It's awful. It's just hard because the method you're recommending, which I firmly believe to be the right method, part of the reason it isn't popular and is hard to make popular is because it's not easily monetized. That's where all these groups come
That's
in
right.
is we, pay us this much money to make your kid this much percent better. And it's like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But to
Right.
do
And
that,
that
they have
percent,
to,
the percent wrong, it comes from them, their same arbitrary measures that
yeah,
they're
so of
using with
course
these arbitrary things. Yeah.
they're going to be the ones like, like, oh, say snack, say snack, say snack. They've got a quota to meet. They don't need you to develop well. They just need you to spit these words. And that's what's so
They're
hard is
getting through the day. Yeah, your
it
job, again, when you look at your role as this language facilitation practitioner, your role is to facilitate this child. We are motivating, encouraging, equipping, and empowering. That's
yeah,
all. You can't make anybody do anything.
no. You can coax them into repeating things, but you can't like make someone learn language
And
as a
why?
key
And
concept.
why? Because, like you just talked about, what for?
Make
There is
money.
not even
Yeah.
the evidence that they say, those reasons, say snack, say snack, say snack, those reasons for those methods are based on lies. It's not true. It's data that's been manipulated. In the college world, how you can write a study to prove anything if you write it the right way. So
Yeah.
these percentages
Well,
is
and it
how
doesn't
fast do we use operant conditioning to train a human being to change
absolutely.
their behavior. That's
And you
all.
can and none of these studies ever include the emotions and feelings of the student, which in my
No.
opinion is so important because
The ones that have, yeah, the ones that
you can
have, call them out every single time.
yeah,
The
you
ones
can
that, because there are studies, but they don't like to call those out because, again, it's
no.
not monetized.
Because
It's
the
not
thing is,
monetized.
yes, they are successful because you can coerce a child into saying and doing whatever you want, but coercion does not a healthy child make. And I have
No.
friends my age who are still traumatized from ABA and ABA adjacent programs.
Yeah, coercion takes away the functionality, right?
Yep.
The only way you'll continue to do that job is under coercion.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
trained.
It's false motivation because the
That's
fact
right.
is that you don't have to make up motivation for using language. There's a million reasons to develop language learning skills. Most children find the one that appeals to them. I want to talk about my feelings. I want to go to school. I want to make friends, whatever they want. And that's what motivates them. But if you tell them over and over and over, say this and you'll get a cracker, say this and you'll get a cracker, like they're a
Right.
parrot, eventually there's going to come a time when nobody's going to give them a cracker. And then it's all just going to shut down again.
Yeah.
Because they never learned a real concrete reason to learn language that they feel the need to learn it from the bottom of their heart. And let me tell you, Marci, I worked with so many children, and even if some of them didn't want to talk, there were none of them who just didn't want to communicate. Even those who didn't have a lot of social interest, didn't appear to want friends at that phase in their life, even they found practical interest of, oh, if I ask for my lunch instead of hitting this person a bunch of times, I am way more likely to get my lunch. Which, if that's your motivation, if you're not a social person, that's awesome, because language is not just emotional, it's really practical.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Spoken language. That's why it's fun to learn languages, right? Because you're like, now I can connect and communicate with more people.
Yeah, it's I I love it. I know that there are people who love it less, but even still, it's such a core facet of our society and our humanity that it's very rare that somebody just opts out, in my experience, of the whole thing. There are those who find talking too hard, but even they will figure out facial expressions and gestures and touches. And there's
Yeah, and I
I've
think
never met a
it
kid who was
doesn't.
just like, I'll never communicate, forget it. Like,
Right. And
I,
even it doesn't matter how young they are, it doesn't matter how old they are. If they are limited in their verbal skills, they are using communication. From the time you're born, you're crying. I always joke about even the babies, you
thank
haven't
you.
had this experience, but mommies who have babies, how do they know the baby wants pickles? How do they know the baby's tired? How do they know they're already intuitively communicating? And see, I think more people are ready to connect into this intuitive communication with
I
their
hope so.
kids themselves. At least we hope so. And then when they're hiring care staff, someone not just to babysit their kid, but to actually facilitate something, now this is a whole new level of
Yeah.
service that you are providing.
What I always would say is, I've met a lot of people who can't speak, but everybody talks.
That's right.
Everybody talks somehow. Never met somebody who didn't. Not in my whole
Yeah,
life.
they're just not. I always say when I talk to parents of kids who are not talking yet. They're
Yep.
all communicating, but they're just not talking yet, because if you're facilitating them, look at just even the client that you've had, just the few weeks that you've had together, how
Oh my
much
God.
more you have heard from him,
Yep.
literally in functional speech.
I mean, I don't want to, I'm not just doing this to toot my own horn, because there's a lot of factors at play, but his development has been insane. I mean, it's been really, as an academic, it's been really fun to watch, because I would be like, and that's not just with me as like a person, that's not him getting more comfortable with me. His mother is like, I've never heard him say so much. I've never heard this much. I'm like, oh, that's so good to hear. That's so
And
fantastic.
how many weeks now? How many weeks?
How many weeks? Quite a few. I think I started mid-October. So, or no, sorry. Way earlier, mid-September. I get those 2 months confused. So
Yeah.
like a month and a half now.
So 6 weeks, because that's usually what I say. 3 to 6 weeks. Now, I know that it didn't start right away. It probably took you some time
Nope.
to earn that trust. How long, how many weeks did it take to earn his trust?
That's hard to say, because there wasn't a moment where he flipped. It
Ah,
was very slow. I think that the big thing I had to learn was there couldn't be, I had to focus really hard to hear what he said, because the student I work with, um, one of the things that is difficult for him is pronouncing words in a way that is hearable to other people. So he's saying it, but his exact pronunciation could use a little work if he's going to be talking to strangers, because we recognize it, but not other people don't usually. And
right.
what happened for the first several weeks is, for first few times, no talking at all. And I would be sort of mystified, because he'd have these whole conversations with his mother that didn't sound like anything. And then he'd get to me and I'd be like, why isn't he talking to me? But I didn't force him. I didn't push him, especially since his mother said, don't do that, and I was like, you got it. And then what would happen is he had this interesting phase where all the talking from him was really, really quiet, really, really hesitant. If I didn't hear him, he would never repeat himself, you know. And so I had to kind of get to this phase where it was this very clear testing of the waters of what happens when I talk around this person. And what helped the most was I understood him a few times, and when I didn't, I made absolutely clear that it wasn't his fault. So it would go one of two ways. Either I would understand him and I would repeat it back to him. I'd go, oh, did you just say outside, that you want to go outside? Fantastic job telling me. We will go outside because you did such a great job telling me, the very positive reassurance. And if I didn't understand him, I had to give this very pointed, like, I hear that you're talking to me and it's great that you're talking to me. Unfortunately, I didn't do a good job hearing you that time. And I think it was just that really, really laid on thick. You're not doing it wrong. It's awesome that you're trying, even if we're not to a point where we're communicating effectively just yet. And that encouragement over time, now, even though he's still insecure, I love our walks so much because we will have whole conversations. And when I say conversations, I don't want you to think he just is now like, yes, and then I went to the park and I went to school. And I just mean that he's employing all the different kinds of communication he knows, from his verbal tone to the couple of words to like facial expressions to physical touch, to express and explain things to me. And I've had some fantastic encounters with him that were just so cool for me to be like, how did this go? How did that go? And he would experiment with tone, he'd experiment with language. Sometimes he would, and when I got it, he would get so excited. D doesn't do a lot of tone when he speaks. It's mostly a very sort of predictable pitch. But on this particular day, I was like, D, well, we go for this walk every day, but we never go on the playscapes. Are you interested in those? Or are they kind of young for you? Because they were he's kind of getting to be a bit big for them. And what he does is he turns to me and he goes, eh. And I thought it was so funny because I'm like, perhaps I'm misinterpreting you, but it sounds to me from your tone like you're not very enthusiastic. And then I would say, because she loves when I teach him new vocab, I'd be like, enthusiastic means excited. So it sounds like you're not very excited to go to the park. And he just grinned and started laughing because this was the first time his experiments with tone had effectively communicated what he was trying to communicate. And I was like, that's so exciting. That's so cool.
Yeah, and that's a really, you guys who are listening, this is a perfect example of reach and teach. You really have to get in and interpret what these things are. But you didn't say, oh, you said, I don't want park. You just gave him more. You gave him additional vocabulary, enthusiastic. And he's like, now you think I'm smart. Now you're talking to me like a 9-year-old and not like a 2-year-old. And he probably had a, what did you just say? And then you're like, yeah, I explained this thing again, because what happened is maybe you didn't get eye contact that whole time. But when you offered him something more, as far as let's learn about this vocabulary, and it was just right where he was in the moment, and you're like, I've heard that expression before. That kind of means, it's kind of for
so important.
babies.
Yeah, and it's so important to acknowledge the fact that I think we get a small-minded view of language when we try to teach it to other people, that it's just words. It's just words, and you have to use the right ones. But how many times has somebody asked you, do you want to go to this restaurant? And like, we joke about it because it's so colloquial, but that's 100% a correct way to express that concept.
And it means a whole sentence. I went there last time. And that sentence, what it means, is dependent on the communication partner, because he said, but you knew that's the noise that people make when they're unenthusiastic.
Yeah, I know. I'm getting like giddy because this is like my favorite subject, is communication language. I've done a bunch of classes about like conversation analysis, and it was just one of the coolest moments of he was experimenting after only using like very rigid, what he's been taught were the correct words with me. He did this experiment of, okay, what if I use this sort of colloquial sound my mother makes, and I know what it means, but is she gonna know what it means? And he did it, and when he burst into laughter, he was thrilled. He was like, yes, like that's exactly what I meant.
Exactly. And it was not just you are unhappy. It was more. It was better. It was cool. It was a cool word, right? It was
And
a cool way to say it. And that's why he
yeah,
loved it, because you did it in a cool way, because that's what a connected language facilitation practitioner does, everybody. Avi, I don't know where you came from. You're like a mini me reincarnated or
I'm
something.
beginning to notice that. Yes, this has gone on for a very long time, and I don't want it to end because I'm like, oh my god, somebody gets what I'm talking about. Because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I love language, I love conversation, and I love the parts of language that people neglect. Not just the words, but what's between the words. And I think part of the reason I can make it sound so cool is I'm being entirely sincere. I'm not just saying, "Oh, good job, I guess." I know the details. I've read conversational analysis papers, and I'm going like, that's colloquialized language, that's tone, that communicates way more than if you said, I don't want to go to park. It's communicating that you don't want to go because you're not terribly interested. You don't want to go with a kind of tepid mood. Like, it has all these other features that he is unlocking. And when people reduce themselves to, you know, I want park, I want park, I want you to think for a moment if that was really how you talked and how much you would be lacking, how much you use gesture and laughter and facial expressions and tones and noises and just the richness and the wealth of every single corner of language. And how when students try to experiment with this and children try to experiment with this, they're kind of going, no, 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 you're supposed to use the words. We don't even use the words. We
You're
use
right.
all of
You're
it.
right.
Somebody
We all
stop
do.
me.
And I think, no, and it's perfect. It's really, really perfect. And it's super, super important, because I think it's something that I probably don't even talk about enough on the channel, because parents just are desperate to hear these words. And I remind them that these kids are communicating, but the nonverbal communication kind of elevates before even the words come. Like, you get those colloquialisms, you get those little eye gestures, you get the fact that he grabs your hand on the walk instead of
Yeah,
ignores you and walks on the other side of the sidewalk, right?
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, yes, we always want to hear spoken word because the fact is that's the most practical analytical facet of language. There's no real way to tone your way into something like, me and Marci had a video call at 3 o'clock on Tuesday. You can't, you
Right,
need
it's
words
not
for the specific.
functional. It's communicative, but it's not always
Yeah,
functional.
but also it's not as though the other things are to be unlearned. They're also hugely important. It's just we want to add them to language. We want to
Yeah,
add them
and I
to
think you
spoken
have to
word.
do it at the same time. So while you're
Yeah.
teaching, this is a play place, this is a playground, this is a equipment or whatever, that is not necessarily words that this kid uses constantly, where
Yeah.
instead of those labels, he's not using them all the time. That's why they're teaching them at the school, because he's
Yeah.
not saying them. I don't want to say using them, because he probably is under his breath, but he's just not saying them. That's a spatula. But who does? Who does talk like that?
Nobody.
Nobody does. So,
Yeah.
and that's what they're teaching them. That's a this, and this is a that, and the thing is blue, and the boy is walking, and, nobody talks like
The
that.
way the way I always
So,
feel about that is, don't you remember being 9? I'd be like, I'm done. Like, boring,
I know.
boring, boring. Let
But
me on
I
the
think,
playground.
like you said, the current systems see, they don't get paid unless they do things by the book. And especially
Yeah.
in these centers that are insurance covered,
Yeah.
they've got to show their data. I can't imagine when you were working in those other places, even now with your visits now, you've got to write up a little something. Before, it was
Yeah.
numbers had to be included in those write-ups. And that's why this is different. And you're right. So what you monetize with this is the experience, right? Now
Yeah.
you know from working with all of your clients. You've gathered, see, this is what had to happen to me. And it didn't happen until I was after probably about 100 clients that actually paid me, trusted me to talk to them through the computer that they could do the work because I was in the same mindset. I used to be a therapist by the hour. If I'm not pulling words, I'm not effective. And that's
Yeah.
what I was taught in school, right? And so now I realize there are other ways to be effective. And even the parents have to realize there are ways that they can be effective. And it's not by doing, it's by being and
Yeah.
connecting. And because you already know all the words you need, you have good language, right? You know all the language that you need in Spanish and all the languages that you teach. You know
Yeah.
more. You know more. You just be confident in the fact we're not teaching rocket science here. You're not
Yeah.
academically elevating him. You're just functionally teaching spoken language. And remember, these kids, what their parents want is for them to be able to be seen for who they are, right? Just like you
Absolutely.
and your peers. When you show up to class at college, your teacher expects you to be there, to take notes, to listen, to pass your tests, to do all of your assignments, and you have to do that independently. There is no one prompting you, pushing you, saying, there's one more test question, concentrate on your test question. You had to somehow move from a baby who needed everybody done for you, stuck a bottle in your mouth, to
Yeah.
now, look at you. You're teaching other people. You're doing it for other people. How
Yeah.
did that happen? Over time through experience. So what you're doing, and like I said, you write right on there that you are an intuitive, natural spoken language facilitator.
That does
And
sound
people are
nice.
going to
I
be,
never know what to
what
call
the
myself.
heck is that? People are going to say, what the heck is that? And you're going to say, I connect with your kid, all the things that you described yourself as. Because
Yeah.
what you are is in natural language. Because I love my newest book is called Intuitive Natural Speech Facilitation. Because remember, these kids want spoken language. It's
Hmm.
not just, the other places they're like, yeah, these kids are communicating with their PEC system or their board or their whatever. And it's not the same. It's not what these parents want. It's not what the kids want.
Yeah.
D does not want a book full of pictures. He does not want that.
No. It's I appreciate AAC for many things because I think it's very helpful for those who struggle with certain pieces of spoken
Right.
language. It's especially helpful. I've worked with a lot of people with motor issues where
Mm-hmm,
that's really
mm-hmm.
nice because their mouths just won't make the sounds.
That's the only reason I think that they are good long term. Like if you've got a real motor issue that your mouth can't work, but if you are mumbling, if you have said words, there's no reason to use them except for very short term. And they need them. The only reason they need them is in facilities. Because remember, their job at the facility is to get the kid through the day. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
I
all.
mean, yeah, I don't know. I've heard good things and bad things from people who've used them. I think
Yep.
that assuming that their speech isn't good enough and sticking a tablet in their hand can be very condescending. But at the same time,
Oh yeah,
AAC
no,
is
that's not it. Like I said, and I would never, I believe that, like you said, these people who are not speaking yet truly feel the disability of their language
yeah.
delay. They truly feel the disability. And if there is something that they can use to help them even communicate the basics
Yeah,
when they're
sometimes
not
it's
able
helpful.
otherwise,
It doesn't really
that's the
compare to
role.
spoken language, and so there is a lack. But I do have an app on my phone for exactly that because it's a different part of the brain and it's way
Yep.
easier to use if I'm in that position where I can't speak. And so I'm open to the idea, but at the same time, it
It's a backup. It's not your
yeah,
primary. It's a backup.
it is. It is. And I think that it's very rare that people are satisfied with it once they get really good at it. You know, I've met a couple people, one or two people who just had a harder time talking than using
Yeah.
the device. But at the same time, you know, it's big. It's kind of a hindrance. You know, I try not to speak too verbally against it because to each their own. Like I
Right. Well,
understand
and
if
I'm
you
not
need
going to
it.
say anything.
Yeah,
I'm, like I said, my role and your role in this
yeah.
job, like what your client hired you to do is natural, intuitive spoken language facilitation. And
The most
that
yeah.
and in a client who you get, you would be intuitive enough to know this person needs an assistive device at this stage.
Well, and you
And you would
understand.
also be intuitive to know that you would never take it away from them as long as they need it.
That's the
right?
thing. I think that's why
And
I'm being touchy. Where the last place I worked, we would have like, oh, he's not allowed to use that anymore. And I'd
oh
be like,
yeah, no, no, no,
are you
no. That's
kidding?
not the thing. You can't,
It's
yeah, you can't give
communication.
a kid something and then take it away. That's the same thing they're doing with this deal. And that's why I don't like them in these schools, because they teach the kid, instead of teaching spoken language, they teach it. So let's say the kid is just late talking. They can hear just fine, their mouth works just fine, but they are tech addicted, or I mean, when we get them in early, it could be parents who were with nannies, and kids are with nannies and working all the time. They just did not hear people talking to them, so they're late talking, remember, under 3 years old, and labeled with these disorders, because if they're 2.5 year olds talk a lot. And if they're tech addicted, or they haven't been hearing spoken language, they're going to have all kinds of nonverbal communication, all kinds,
Yeah.
manipulation, and all kinds of stuff. And the parents are reacting to the manipulation, the behavioral manipulation communication, and
Because they're
calling
two.
it right. Yeah, because they're two.
Yeah. What are you gonna do?
And they think and they don't give these kids credit for the fact that they developed this language. These 2 year olds who you think
Yeah.
aren't capable of
That
anything,
stuff's
they
just as valid.
developed an entire nonverbal language that is manipulating you to give them things.
Let me tell you, it's a little different with D because he's older now and he's starting to really
Yeah.
develop some maturity. But let me tell you, as somebody who's worked with late talkers who were like 4, 5, 6, everybody can talk when they want their snack. I Everybody finds a way to be like people assume like, oh, he's nonverbal. He must be so easy. He must be so sweet. No, like they're kids. Of course they're gonna be obnoxious and make sure they get what they want. And like this implication of like, oh, if they can't talk, they must just not pester you about things they want. Every 5-year-old pesters you about things that they want. And I
And
had
because
all
they're
different
not
kids.
talking doesn't mean they're quiet. They're noisy kids.
No,
Noisy.
there's this classic visual, right, of like the autistic kid like sitting in the corner, like sad looking, like, oh, he can't talk. He's in his own little world. All the kids that age who were autistic and couldn't talk, if I was like, no, like we don't have time for snack right now. We'll have snack later. They were up on me. They were shaking my shirt. They were yelling in my ear. Like like it was just a matter of spoken language. The rest of their language was like pretty clear in give me my snack right the heck now.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and that stuff is so universal, and it is comforting to a degree, because it's like, okay, so this kid has problems with expression, but their desires and motivations are that of any other kid, are strikingly
That's
normal.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And age appropriate. So even
Yeah,
though they might enjoy things that are younger than their age, in most cases, they really do enjoy things that are age appropriate,
that's
because
why I
these
got
kids,
get so
it's not
mad,
an
because
intellectual problem. That's why when you use big vocabulary, you get a big smile.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I used to have that problem where I'm sure this concept is not pleasant for you, but have you heard of the concept of mental age?
Yeah.
Yeah, that got used the last place I worked, and I was like, that is the
Oh,
most
oh,
ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life, because they were all matching with their age. And the boy I work with now, I have to think to myself. I sometimes go, okay, is this a feature of him being a late learner? Or is this a feature of him being 9 years old, which is a really hard transitional age into preteenhood, where you're getting a lot of maturity really fast and your social world is exploding and it's frustrating? I think it's so important to be able to think back, okay, how did I feel when I was that old? And all of them were different. I worked with kids from like 5 years old to older than me, which honestly was ridiculous because they called them kids. This woman is older than me and more responsible and has her head about her more, and you're like, her mental age is 5. It's like, what? She's 22. Like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But yes, D's age, mental and otherwise, is 9 years old, and that is always going to affect things. And so he doesn't shake me down and yell in my ear for candy like the 5-year-olds do.
It happens with parents that they fall into the same trap because they remember they're every day, all day with these kids. And unless the kid is showing development, they stay days and days and weeks and months and years go by. But if
Yeah.
the development doesn't happen, the parent still treats them like the age of the performance, right?
Yeah,
That
and
they
it's
are. And
sad
that's
because
this mental age business.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
different kinds of development too, and I think it's hurtful to imply that somebody can't become more mature and more experienced just because they can't speak. We consider speech a mark of maturity. There's so many other
Yeah.
ways to be mature, and the fact is, especially when you're a kid who's had it hard, who's been frustrated, who's had to contend with being in a marginalized group, of course you're going to be mature as you get older and know a lot as you get older,
Right.
you
You grow
know?
up faster almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and the boy I work with, he's really emotionally mature. And I think that's one of the things that's most impressive is, everybody knows that there's such a thing as savants. He's very good at math, which I think is awesome, but I mean, I've seen it before. It's not like a huge surprise. What's been really cool is we'll go on these walks and I can ask him very sincere questions and I don't dumb it down for him. I say, are you okay with this? Is this pushing your boundaries? Are you upset about this? And I can get back very emotional realness and real
Wow.
thought about his state as a person, as a human.
This is the dream of
It was
every
wonderful.
parent of a late talker is for them to be able to communicate these kinds of messages. And the reality is, moms and dads, they're doing it every day. You
Yeah,
have to be an intuitive, natural speech and language facilitator and
absolutely.
reach in and really interpret the deep dive understanding. And he was testing this gal just like he tests everybody. And you
Yeah,
witnessed that testing going on, but you didn't, you could have said this was a bad session because he didn't perform at that
yeah,
time. But you saw that he was really struggling and you gave him credit and praise for working through the struggle. This is what we need to encourage these kids to do. We
yeah.
understand they're struggling. If they could talk, they would. Look at your own self. You've got an app on your phone for a just in case because you know that this happens to you. And
I
these
think,
kids
yeah,
know that it happens to them. They know it.
it's maddening. I mean, I think the biggest thing to come home with is the hard part is not literally forming a word and speaking it. So much of it is emotional. And
Yeah.
so much of it, it's really hard to be a kid who can't talk. All the other kids around you can, and they know that. And I'm not trying to make
Well,
anybody miserable because obviously being a late talker is still a fantastically rich life, full of love, full of fun. But I think if you are unwilling to address the emotional side and you just think, what's so broken in my kid that he's not talking, then you're never going to get to the root of it because it's about trust, it's about fear, it's about insecurity, you know. And that stuff, that's always the hard part. That's
yeah, and I
really
think
hard.
that's why what sets me apart is that intuitive part because
Yeah, it's
we
huge.
speech model, if you model X speech, you're going to get Y output over time. That's more conditioning. That's all just more conditioning.
Yep.
What we're really facilitating here is this kid, whoever they are, this late talker, sharing their wisdom, their ideas, their feelings, their
Yeah.
heart, their whatever. That's what you're facilitating. And however it comes out of them, you celebrate it and you give them
Yeah.
credit for trying and then it evolves on its own, right? So you don't have to model do this, do this, do this, or say
Absolutely.
this,
And
say this, say this. You
I
just
never got,
represent.
yeah.
You just represent an intuitive, connected conversationalist using age appropriate language, and the kids pick it up. The kids pick it up.
Absolutely.
6 weeks' time, this is a different communicator. This is a different communicator, this child. It's not
Yep.
perfect, but it is really evolved in 6 weeks. And remember, this is a 9-year-old who's been struggling with late talking for a long time. I know that you're going to be a part of this kid's life for a long time because his mom
Yes, I'm
sees
pretty
the
locked in.
value in you. His mom sees the value in you, just like I do. She was reading that care.com thinking, I think I just got this from heaven,
Oh,
because
I'm so glad it worked out.
you are the exact replica of what you could duplicate yourself, and I'd put you in homes in Australia. See, here's the thing about this. You can do this all over the world. I got 5 families in Australia who would love to have someone like you. I've got a family in Dubai who just hired someone, and she's flying me to Dubai to train that person to be like you,
Oh,
because the only
awesome.
people there who are getting any kind of training are ABA people. And so she's
That
only
means
got
so
12 hours of ABA training. And this woman's like, okay, now that I've got you and you can get in the door because you've got your certificate, I'm going to give you your real training. And you're going to forget all that. And you're going to read this book that Marci wrote. And now I'm flying there and I'm going to work with her to turn her into you.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. This has been such a self-esteem boost. I
No,
really appreciate
do
that there
what
are
you're
people.
doing. Because the thing is, you remember, I'm not working with these kids. I used to be, when I was a therapist. So, after 20 years of speech therapy practice, I did no more than what you're doing, Avi. No more. In fact, all the testing and documentation, I tried as much as I could to do as little of that as possible.
Yeah, that's what I do. I have
As
to do my
little
little
as possible. The
reviews.
time,
Yeah.
your time, what this family is paying you for is this intuitive, connected time that you spend with him.
It's
And then
fantastic. Yeah.
what you sell is this process. You're like, look, go buy yourself a workbook. It's on Amazon.
Yeah,
We'll
you're very, I
document.
do think you're right, and to speak to sort of the audience for a moment, I didn't know about the supposed time projection before this meeting, so I'm not just sort of like, yeah, you're so right, in just 11 weeks, like we're a diet pill ad. Like this is just genuinely the process that I have witnessed, the direct words from his mother saying that she's hearing not just words, but full sentences all the time that she's never heard before, you know, and I really, I really do subscribe to this method. I think it is a very clear indicator that this is a boy who came from the mainstream way of doing things, and pretty much all it did for him was make him miserable and distrustful, and then he got switched to this track, and as if a machine booted up, he just immediately started blasting back to where it was hoped that he would be. So I really, it's rare that I go that I sound like a product placement, but I really do appreciate what you're doing here. I do think this is really the right track. I hope we can keep communicating, Marci. I hope we can stay in touch as I get older, because right now, like, I want a career in this, and that's the hard part. Is I adore D and I adore his mother, but at the same time, I'm in college. It's a part-time job. Eventually, I'm going to need to make a living this way, and I really appreciate you encouraging me to do that and telling me, not to change, because it can be very discouraging looking down this
Yeah.
tunnel and thinking that sooner or later somebody's going to rope you into ABA if you ever want to make money and do what you love.
And it's not later, it's sooner. It's happening yesterday, Avi. Listen, what you need to do is you need to start to put yourself together a program that is not an hourly basis situation, that is for X thousands of dollars per month, like
Wow.
$2,500 a month, paid up front. You will show up to their house and do this for
Interesting.
X amount of hours per week. And you get
Okay.
the money up front, and you don't worry about care.com taking a shtick of it. You start putting up, get yourself a little website or a little something like that, and you sell your service as a natural language, spoken language facilitator. And you say, we work with this method, we work with this workbook, we work with this stuff. And
Yeah.
over the process of 11 weeks, I will facilitate a significant improvement in your kid's speech between you and me. But the requirement is that somebody is doing spoken language facilitation according to the itinerary in your workbook every single day. First of all, you get these parents, you don't join them, because this isn't I do it instead of you at first. It's we are our job is this. This is what I do. I help parents get the best results from this. We do this together, you and me. I'm a facilitator practitioner.
No, I think that's a fantastic idea. I really appreciate the encouragement. And if you may allow me to plug for a moment, as you can see, I'm looking to move forward in this career. If anybody else who enjoys Marci's teaching is in the New York City area, I'd love to chat with you. I may not have a bunch of time right now because college and work, but just if you want to keep each other on our radar, that could be something.
And I'll tell you what,
great.
You know what, you guys, even if Avi isn't your regular full-time language facilitator, she could be a consultant for you and come into your house, because I know that's what happened at first. Like you just said at the beginning, your boss, my client, hired you to check you out. She was testing you as much as you were testing them.
I still think it's worth mentioning that as somebody who both struggled with a lot of these things as a kid and still continues to, and who's, all of my friends or the vast majority of my friends struggled with, if not as much, often more than me. I am a person who is 19 years old. I'm in college and I work, and I'm able to have fun despite my addiction to schedule, and I have close relationships despite the difficulty having close relationships, and I have friends who are more who grew up in a way that I think is probably even closer to the way your kids grew up. My best friend in the whole world was diagnosed autism spectrum disorder when he was very young, and he's just about to get his GED. He's going to move out of his parents' house. He has a pet. He has numerous fulfilling relationships in his life, and I just want you guys to be aware that horizon is not something I'm lying about. That eventual having a really fulfilling, happy life as a person who has these struggles, as a person who I know it may be hard to believe coming from me because I'm doing very well right now, but a person who on a bad day can't talk at all and has self-destructive stims and needs to have the same food the same time over and over and over again, all these things that you're thinking, my God, how is he going to function in the world like that? You find ways. I have a fantastic life. I just wanted to communicate that because I think a lot of people really have a hard time swallowing it, but it really is possible, and I really think your kid's going to get there.
Change the world. I think that's it. You can help relate to these kids, especially these post-pandemic kids that are just sort of disconnected anyway, and all of that.
Pandemic. That sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, we could get into all of that, whatever. Listen, we could talk for days, you and I. And I know you've got to go study, and I've got to get back to doing language facilitation and stuff, but we will stay in touch. And thank you so much for sharing your experience and your story and everything.
This was so wonderful. I really appreciate it.
With a whole range of Waves of Communication resources, from free content to customized coaching, you now have access to everything you need to elevate spoken language to infinite success. You are welcome to get your journey started with my 11-week language facilitation Journey to Speech workbook. You can access this workbook and all of the language facilitation resources on my website, wavesofcommunication.com.